Have you opened your power bill recently and felt like you're being drained by a vampire? Yeah, you are not alone. Prices are up everywhere, utilities are asking for record rate hikes, and, everyone's looking for someone to blame. But what's really going on? Let's get into the real reasons behind that sticker shock.
Okay, so quick pop quiz. What do you think is driving up your electricity prices more? Is it all the state mandates for clean energy? Or is it the massive, and I mean massive, new demand from AI and data centers? Because these are the two things you hear about all the time from politicians and on the news. So which one is it?
So, on one hand, you've got the argument that forcing all these renewables onto the grid requires a ton of expensive new infrastructure. Makes sense. But on the other hand, you have the undeniable fact that data centers are incredibly thirsty for power, and that demand is just exploding. Honestly, both of them seem like pretty solid answers. But here's the twist. If you picked either one of those, you're probably wrong. Yeah, according to a really detailed new study, the loudest arguments in the room don't actually match up with the data. The real story is, well, it's a lot more interesting, and it's happening right in our own backyards.
So researchers at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab really dug into the numbers, and what they found, it just doesn't fit into a simple political narrative. So let's look at the real culprits. Okay, so this is where everything you think you know gets flipped on its head. The actual cost of making electricity, the power plants, has actually dropped by 35% since 2005. That's mostly thanks to cheaper renewables. But the cost of just delivering that power to your house has absolutely skyrocketed. Transmission costs have tripled, and the cost of your local poles and wires has doubled.
So here's the bottom line. The study points to three main drivers. First, we're just replacing our ancient grid of poles and wires. Second, we're spending billions to protect that grid from things like wildfires and storms. And third, the roller coaster prices of natural gas, which still sets the price for power in a lot of places. These are the things that are really hitting your wallet. But that just brings up another question, right? Why has it gotten so ridiculously expensive just to maintain the wires? To get that, we need to take a look at the business model of the companies that actually own them. This quote from Jigar Shah, an investor and a former director at the Department of Energy, it just gets right to the heart of the problem. For decades, the utility business model hasn't been set up to reward efficiency or innovation, it's been set up to reward spending. So here's how that cycle works. Utilities make their money by earning a guaranteed return on big, expensive capital projects. So when it's time to upgrade the grid, they have a huge incentive to propose the most expensive, old-school solutions, like just building more poles and wires, instead of looking at cheaper, smarter technologies. They spend $1 billion, pass the entire cost on to you, and then collect their guaranteed profit right on top.
Now, you might be thinking, shouldn't regulators be stopping this? And you're right, they should. But the reality is, state regulatory commissions are often totally understaffed and just overwhelmed. They can't possibly check every single line item in a multi-billion-dollar proposal. And so, a lot of the time, these massive projects get pre-approved, locking in higher rates for all of us for years to come.
All right, this is where it gets a little weird and pretty counterintuitive. We've all been told that these huge new power hogs like data centers are a massive problem. But in the recent past, the opposite was often true. Adding these giant new customers sometimes actually lowered your bill. How on earth is that possible?
Well, the key idea here is something the experts call peanut buttering. Think about it. The massive fixed costs of the grid, all those poles, wires, substations, they have to be paid for by somebody. The utility spreads those costs across all the electricity that gets sold, kind of like spreading peanut butter on bread. So the more electricity they sell, the less each individual kilowatt hour has to cost to cover those fixed expenses.
Let's just use a super simple example. Imagine a $1 billion grid upgrade. In a state with 1 million customers, that works out to about $1,000 per customer. But now, let's say you add a bunch of huge data centers. Suddenly, you're spreading that same $1 billion cost over a much larger base. The cost per customer actually goes down. And this is pretty much exactly what happened in states with big data center booms over the last decade.
But that was the past. Today, we are facing an absolute explosion of new demand. From data centers, from electric vehicles, from manufacturing. It's truly unprecedented. And this brings us to a really critical moment.
The experts are really clear on this one. We are at a fork in the road, and the choices we make right now in the next few years are going to determine whether our energy bills stabilize or just keep climbing higher and higher. So path one is the old way. Just keep building more expensive poles, wires, and power plants, and then pass all those costs on to us. Path two is the new way. It means looking at a whole toolbox of solutions, things like batteries, smart grid technologies, and flexible demand that can reduce strain when the system is stressed. It's about being smart, not just building bigger. And look, the stakes here are huge. One expert estimates that if we really embrace these innovative, lower-cost solutions, we could reduce our electricity bills by as much as 20% by 2030. That is a massive savings for families and businesses all across the country. So this all leads us to one final question. A tidal wave of demand for electricity is coming. That's not really up for debate. The real question is how we choose to meet it. Are we finally going to break this old, expensive cycle and embrace innovation? Or are we just going to build a much, much more expensive version of the past? The answer is going to show up in your power bill.